right, so show's streaming right now, recording right now, and we are live. Welcome to the Mr. Rafferty Phys Ed Life. I'm only kidding, Mr. Smith. I kind of do that halfway decent lame teacher joke to start every single show. We don't really have a show here. We just call it like a live stream with our special guest. But I like to start every time we do this just with a welcome for all of our listeners that'll be listening now or later on the Twitch app or on the YouTube channel. Today's guest we have here, Mr. / Coach Todd Smith. Coach, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction and then you can go ahead and follow up with it. As mentioned just on the tweet, given the notice to everyone before, Coach Smith is the physical education teacher and the athletic director at West Boylston High School. So for our students, our major demographic, Mr. Smith, for Leicester High School, you are their David Stanek, if you will, over in that world. But Coach Smith, Mr. Smith has just some interesting perspectives that he's going to share with us. Really on the educational side, on a lot of things that we're all really familiar with for a majority of our listeners, just because of all the things that we've been doing for this past month for our remote learning activities or enrichment activities, and really the impact that this unfortunate global pandemic has had in our local area, especially for our athletics, given the rough news that was given yesterday. So in those two realms, that's what Coach Smith is just going to talk to us for a bit about today. But before we get into the meat and bones of that stuff, I'll let you go ahead and give you an introduction. Why don't you tell everyone about yourself for a bit?
Okay. I live in Holden, and obviously for the last 20 years, I've worked at West Boylston High School, coached basketball, baseball, been the athletic director. I'm on my second tour now of duty there. Um, been in the health and phys ed department my whole time there. Before that, I had coach at the collegiate level, both for baseball and basketball. I was assistant AD at Becker College out in Leicester. So I have obviously athletics are very important to me, and kids being fit and active, um, and my kids are all three of my kids have done athletics and through their schooling, and so it's a very important part of our life. So
Well, to fill everyone in as well, for our listeners, how I know you is, well, we kind of first met throwing BP to kids of all different age levels over at the CRA, and then as just our paths continue crossing at the CRA batting cages, we kind of just got to know a little bit how we have this mid-Wachusett, Swickle connection going on, and that's how I've kind of learned about just your involvement over at West Boylston. But I had no idea about your involvement as the assistant AD over at Becker College. So that's really interesting. Over about 20 years. I'm only in my third year, really, or kind of like second and a half, unfortunately. But no, it's just really nice to see people like yourself just with these years of experience, especially within the classroom. But speaking of which, within the classroom, how's everything going at West Boylston right now? A lot of schools are having this real big challenge, and you're the first one that we have, first guest that we've had on this live stream that can kind of just give an example of what's happening outside of our own little world over at Leicester High School. What are some things at the phys ed department, or if you want to speak on behalf of the school itself, you can go either way. How's West Boylston handling this remote learning thing? It's a lot tougher than it sounds to anyone that isn't a part of this.
well, initially the whole enrichment thing was we started with that, not knowing how long this was going to happen. So we kind of got our heads around that with giving kids some activities to do, something to try at home in hopes of them being active, because I think that's obviously important to break up some of the studying. I'm not naive enough to think kids aren't playing video games, as I see my own 17-year-old son getting his fair share.
What a shocker!
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. But, I think it's important, even if it's as simple as taking the dog for a walk, or, if somebody's got a hoop at their house or whatever. So we gave some suggested activities, and then also emphasized to the kids that we'd love to see them get in 60 minutes of physical activity per day. That's kind of transitioned into the remote learning, where our school system, and I believe most school systems, are doing a pass fail system. Uh, and we're doing our best to try to get all kids involved. The participation numbers each week are growing. Um, so, we've this fourth quarter for us is going to be obviously pass fail, and it's going to have a lesser percentage than the other three quarters had, just because of the unusual circumstances.
With the pass fail thing, that's a whole nother conversation within itself. We'll try not to get too deep into it, just because on our responsibilities of what we're trying to fulfill as physical education teachers, a lot of our content occurs in the classroom during school hours type of thing. So there's enough of a barrier, and I can kind of reflect upon where, first off, the 60 minutes is a huge thing to just preach, especially if you do it every day. It's just a great way to establish habits and just see the benefits of things compound throughout time. And I'm glad to hear that you have a lot of students that are interacting or staying connected with that. I think we could say the same thing as well here over here on the Leicester end, and it's just that it's nice just to be that part of the faculty that doesn't have to, not have to, but isn't pressing so much, just because there's so many other challenging things that our students have to go through. So it seems like even though we're not that far away from each other, we're still kind of doing similar things like that, just on promoting and encouraging the benefits of staying active, which is good.
Well, mindfulness is such a big thing too, where I think it's, mental health and the whole physical
Exactly.
being physically active is very important in everybody's, or should be important in everybody's day-to-day lifestyle. And I know for myself, I go out and take my dog for a walk, and I come back in. Now I'm ready to, get back to emails, which is always probably the last thing on my plate that I like doing or whatever. But I seem to focus a little bit better after some form of physical exercise. And I've been, whether it's throwing batting practice to my son or those type of things. Um, I have a daughter that's going off to play college basketball next year, and continuing to work her out in the driveway and those type of things is a nice little break and diversion from what we're all dealing with.
Hey, we all need it, and it doesn't all just apply for high schoolers. But you make just a good point on mindfulness. That's a message that almost sound like a broken record player here on the show, just on all areas of wellness and how they're all connected with one another. So that's great. But speaking of just some of the things that you've just mentioned, or the things that you don't look forward to as much, but you still have to do anyway, and that's unfortunately check emails, because your position, in addition as the physical education teacher, you're also the athletic director over at West Boylston. And there's probably been a whole bunch of those emails that I've been giving up, particularly on just with this uncertain time that we're all going through. But before we get to that point, if you can, just to give any listeners that are interested, what are your responsibilities as the athletic director at West Boylston?
Well, being at a small school, and West Boylston is a little bit smaller than Leicester, I mean, they're still significant, from scheduling to payroll, to officials, to busing, uniforms, collecting or following up with my coaches to make sure uniforms get collected, to, you know, having little ceremonies for kids that might be doing signings for going off to college, dealing with the local media, our town paper as well as the Telegram and Gazette. Um, those are just tip of the iceberg. You basically at a small high school, you're the equipment manager. You're the the media liaison. You kind of guiding your coaches in the right direction, making sure they're following up with their kids as far as they're doing what they're supposed to be, in school and outside of school. So, the nice thing about the job is there's a variety every single day. A lot of times, I'll be like putting some tape on a soccer net that warrants it, or whatever it might be. So game day prep, and typically I'll have a student intern that will help me with that. But getting the clocks ready to go for games, and kind of all the things that aren't seen behind the scenes that need to get done so the kids can have a good experience.
That's great. I mean, just from another way of just explaining all the responsibilities that you just stated right there. You're basically part-time, finance operators with writing checks, game day operating director. You have just a social aspect for whether it's seniors or national letters of intent. You know, you're part of public relations and human resources in regards for keeping in touch with media, and just being a representative for the school. So that's a whole bunch of things. So for those that have all sorts of tools in the Swiss Army knife, in their Swiss Army knife. It's a interesting position. I see that typically with my co-partner Dave Stanek, because he has a position similar as well, and where there's kind of support behind and all sorts of little details that go from a day-to-day basis, just like what you mentioned, without giving too much information. And this may be the most heavy loaded question here on the live stream. I usually like to ask them first right off the bat, but I figured I'd give you a little bit of break, Coach, with some
Okay, thank you.
softball ones. Yeah, but just without giving too much information, because I understand there's just a confidentiality thing about the school in particular, but just kind of tell us about life for the past 2 weeks to the month, in regards for the details as the athletic director and this quarantine. We unfortunately found out yesterday that we won't be going back to school. So we lost the 2020 spring sports season, which I'm sure is part of the things that you've been busy with. But I'm sure that's just not it. Like, how's life been for you as the AD in this past month?
Surprisingly, it's been pretty busy. We still have mid-watch meetings on Zoom. Um, we were brainstorming how to put a schedule together if we were going to go back for May 4th. Obviously, that's a moot point now. Now I'm actually working on how to recognize our seniors. I'm going to try to do something through social media with that. I just finished up my fall scheduling, about to get into my winter scheduling now, which is a little bit earlier than probably normal. Normally, probably third week of May, I'd start that winter scheduling. So in that, once I go to a schedule, I check with my coaches. Having been a former coach, it kind of helps a little bit where each program's at. You want somewhat of a competitive schedule. So, the kids are in the game. It's not about winning every game. It's not about playing the toughest schedule either. With that being said, with max preps coming out, I'm sure you're probably aware of that.
Yeah.
With their secret formula, I think playing a good schedule will be beneficial, but I'm not really sure exactly what all of that's going to entail. But this day-to-day stuff. I have coaches who've been contacting me. Are we going to have a season? What do you think? Those type of things. I've even had a couple fall coaches reach out. When are we starting signups? When can I get my fall order in for the supplies that I'm going to need for next year? Can we, are we getting it in under this year's fiscal budget, or is it going to go next year? So, just a lot of those type of things that I have going on.
I mean, talk about, just call it what you want, either problems or obstacles or whatever you have coming up. You got to be able to have that almost that hindsight or that vision of just, okay, what's expected next and the steps that are going to be taken towards that. So your experience within coaching, I'm sure definitely helps with that. You wouldn't think without school happening you wouldn't be busy at all, but it's for those exact reasons. Even just as a teacher in itself, of all these things, that it helps to kind of have that vision moving forward, and that applies all to all certain things. It can certainly apply onto the ball field, because you also coach baseball, like you mentioned before. You said you used to coach basketball. Where did you say you coached collegiately again, if you didn't mention that already?
I was the women's coach at Quinsigamond Community College. Before that, I coached with Sean Conrad at Quinsigamond, who kind of got me my start. I was an assistant coach there. He's the Anna Maria coach now. From there, I went to Becker College, and I was the men's coach before starting my career at West Boylston in the fall of 2000.
I was 10
Baseball.
years old at the time, by the way, just so you know.
I'm showing my age. I'm pretty old. I've also, almost right out of college, I was coaching. I got named the baseball coach at Becker when it was a junior college at that time. And I from there went over to Assumption, coached under Sean O'Connor, who was a terrific coach. Then I coached for Barry Glinsky at Quinsigamond. And, he was a Hall of Fame coach as well. So, and then I had a decent run at West Boylston and in baseball, and I help out a little bit now at St. Peter Mary in the last 4 or 5 years. Um, but I guess that career has come to an end now with their merger.
Yeah, just to fill in the listeners right there on that last step that you've had, coaching over at St. Peter Marian. This was their last year of school, and I guess this kind of leads to one of my next questions, and it's just an unfortunate one. You have kids that attend St. Peter Marian as well. So just to start off with it, this is St. Peter Marian's last semester ever, along with Holy Name, because they're going to be merging it's called St. Paul now. It's going to be called St. Paul in the fall semester. So
That's correct.
I
Yeah.
can I can only imagine. So why don't you just tell us how's the community reacting to all this, where it was the last spring sports season and the last semester of both schools ever, and they're just unfortunately not going to be experiencing that before that. How's the school community handling this?
Well, I know the kids in our program, especially the seniors, are devastated. We had a pretty strong team going into the year,
Mm-hmm.
and we're curious to see, what we could get done. And unfortunately, we'll never know. But there's lots of kids that are in that situation. I feel really badly for any seniors, and the whole merger thing in itself was we're kind of taken aback by it. I didn't really anticipate it happening this rapidly. And next year, my son's a junior. He'll be he's a rising senior for next year. So, um, selfishly, I was hoping it might stay status quo for one more year, but nobody really asked me my opinion. So
Well, it's yeah, it is tough and unfortunate. It changes certainly, difficult just within itself, let alone changing schools and then not enjoying just the last times that you have with it there. As I'm the varsity coach over at the Leicester High School baseball team, and we have 6 seniors that took the field this past June, and we never knew it was the last time. So there's probably some things that we'll need to try to do just have something for the seniors, not just the athletes, but the senior and junior proms are lost as well. Graduation's going to be all different, and it's just all unfortunate because I think I mentioned this in a tweet just yesterday, where I don't ever remember a spring where there were no infield flies, no strikeouts looking, no ground rule doubles, no district or state champions at all. So just you make that point of what could have been, what could have happened. We all unfortunately share that right there, but it's happened, and we're gonna be moving on from it. So to kind of ask you on a hybrid baseball coach slash AD question, this may be something that some students are interested about, or at least could be a good question that they should consider. And if there's anything that you could shed light on this, we'd be really interested to hear from you. What do you think are some challenges for the seniors? Obviously, they don't have. They're not going back to high school. They're moving on in whatever ventures in their life. But for the other underclassmen, what do you think some challenges those students should be prepared for going into next year, whether it's from an athletic or an academic type of standpoint?
Well, I think athletically, the challenge is going to be for the kids to kind of stay sharp and not lose and continue to build upon their skill level. You work with some kids, I work with some kids that are serious about their particular sport. I think it's going to be important for kids to still train the best they can. Obviously, these kids are going to have to be a little bit more motivated, but um, you're going to have to be creative and think outside the box. I mean, as far as students go, I had a faculty meeting a little earlier today, and they're talking about schooling may be very different next year. There could be, you know, they're throwing things out there. I don't think anybody truly knows at this point, and hopefully everything will be status quo when we go back in late August. But they were throwing out the possibilities where it could be half the kids come in for half the day, and the other half of kids come in for the back end of the day, or Um, so learning could be very different where there's still, I guess, potentially could be some remote learning, um, you know, on the horizon. So obviously not what I hope for, but um, under the circumstances, I guess I get it.
Okay. You got me on the spot right now because that's really interesting. I have not heard of anything like that before. Um, Without revealing too much, I guess I just say that out of respect because we're not trying to cross too many lines here. But what do you think would be a benefit of a half show up for half the day, the other half show up for the other half of the day? What is that a concern towards like school hours, or is it still like a you know what would be the benefit of doing that?
I think it's just remaining safe where, if kids have to have their temperatures checked as they enter the building,
Okay, yeah,
as, if desks are 6 feet apart, if classrooms can only have 10 kids in it or 12 kids, or depending upon the size of the classroom. I think it's all conjecture at this point. I don't think anybody really knows, but I think there's lots of things that'll be thrown out there. And, you know, depending upon how this looks in our state, hopefully the cases, I think we're at the pinnacle now, and hopefully we'll be going the other way soon. And, you know, at this point, I just want school to be back the way it was, for me personally.
me too, absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of students share that as well, despite how much we've heard them complain in the hallways or in the gym or in other areas with it. But yeah, it's that's a pretty good heads up on something to consider. Just because that's something that I never thought of before. That would be a we're already being tested with patience and perseverance with this type of thing, and we do eventually need to get back to school. I'd agree with that for sure. But it's an interesting point, just on covering the safety measures because we don't know what's.
Well, yeah, I mean, safety is obviously going to have to come first, but it's the social piece is what I'm wondering, like how young people, maybe they're fine as they're playing, their interactive video games, or with texting and tweeting and those type of means. But you kind of wonder, how kids are doing socially during this time.
Because that's not the only skills that are required as you get older. That's there's you make a good point there. There's using technology to communicate for sure, but yeah, the face-to-face interaction still has some value for
For
sure.
sure.
Well, those are all just really really good perspectives, and I really like that last one. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, I hope that I hope that not only just us two schools, but all these other schools in the Commonwealth can find a way to help just be there for the seniors and to make some type of lasting memory because it's all very, very unfortunate. Like what you mentioned, you have a daughter that's going out to school, so I'm sure there's just a lot of mixed feelings that are going on in that whole thing. And thank you just for the transparency, just on that a little bit about yourself, just because it makes it all a little bit more real and a lot of things to just consider for whether it's wellness or, well, yeah, for wellness or for just the education piece within itself. So, Coach, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on to this live stream. Really appreciate you sharing these type of perspectives. Was there anything that you wanted to send off to the listeners, whether it's a piece of advice or a heads up and anything like that?
Well, I mean, this is my first pandemic ever living through, and um, you want to somehow take this negative and turn it into a positive, and maybe through it all, somehow whether you become a better person, or maybe you pick up a musical instrument that you didn't know you could play, or um, through all this, at the very least, you look back upon this time and be like, something you're certainly not going to forget in your lifetime. I know I won't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure how the ice storm was out in Leicester, but I know, like, when the ice storm was here in Holden, that the amount of trees and power lines, that'll be a lasting memory that I'll always have. Not that it was all a positive memory from the cleanup and everything, but somehow, some way, you have an obstacle, As a coach, and as a former player, you're always trying to overcome obstacles. And, through all this, hopefully we become better people and like I said, turn some sort of negative into a positive.
Good message right there. Thank you, Coach. All parts of life for sure. Well, thank you very much again for coming on to the stream. I'm going to end the recording here soon, but you got a couple minutes just to stay on, right?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, thank you again, and thank you for just talking to the listeners, and we will be talking to you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.